This one's happening this month, but we hopefully are going to sponsor a trip to Sonora to find Ditmar's horned lizards, which has it's one of the rarest lizards in North America, and it has a unique history with the THS. And how do we do all of this? Well, we sell stuff and we gratefully accept donations. So if you like what we do, buy some stuff or give us some money. So part of what we do as well is we help publish books, including the Lizards of the American Southwest, which Larry, the trip leader, is an author of this book, as well as Venomous Animals in the United States and Canada. The companion books to Snakes of Arizona are being made. And if you have any photo vouchers or photographs that you'd like to contribute to help in the effort, you can go to this website and help. All right, so before I introduce Matt, I should let you know that next month we're going to have Annie Peralta and Jose Jimenez, I believe is his name. They're a husband and wife duo that run Fauna del Noroeste, which is a conservation NGO in Baja California. And we're kind of like, I guess, sister organizations that they do a lot of work around herps and ecological monitoring. And they're going to talk in April. All right. As an undergraduate, Matt studied prey rattlesnake defensive behavior for his honors degree in biology. After graduating, he spent 2 years in Aruba studying Aruba Island rattlesnake, which is pretty cool. Maybe you can talk to us about that sometime. Matt taught high school biology in the Netherlands for several years before returning to the US, where he completed his master's and PhD here at the University of Arizona. He's published over 50 papers and book chapters dealing with ecology and conservation of herpetofauna, primarily snakes. Currently, he is a research scientist at the School of Natural Resources at the University of Arizona, where he maintains an active research program in the United States and internationally. He's a member of the IUCN Viper Specialist Group and a founding board member of the King Cobra Conservancy. Tonight, he's going to talk about how urbanization affects lizards and snakes. Starting in 2002, they've used a variety of methods to examine responses of snakes and lizards to urbanizations at a study site in the foothills of the Tortolita Mountains near Tucson. And I'll let you take it from here.
All right, thank you, Robert.
Should be able to just go forward, backwards, and then this is the laser.
Okay, cool. Thanks to all of you for coming. I really appreciate it. I've given, I think, several talks to the Tucson Herp Society over the years, but it's been a long time. I was looking back and I think, I don't even remember what I found there, but there's, I think the first one was back in the 90s when I first came to Arizona. I think I might've talked about tiger rattlesnakes, which I'm still hung up on. Hopefully I don't have any slides from that original talk. But usually when somebody asks me to give a talk these days, because I've just given so many, I can't hear myself talk anymore. I asked one of my students to do it. So Anthony Palicki, who's working with me for several years now, is my right-hand man. He's I believe a treasurer of the, no, not treasurer. What do you, they wouldn't trust you with the money. Just a lowly board member. But anyway, he gave a talk in April or January. I'm sure some of you've seen. And Mickey Parker worked with me. He's given talks here before, and other people. So, but now I'm here, and unlucky for you, hopefully it'll go okay. I usually put way more stuff in my talks than I can ever talk about. But the great thing about that is I don't really have any conclusions, so I can just stop anytime. So, if you guys get tired of it, listening to me, I also have some places in there where I can stop if I need to.
I'm gonna try and hide this here. There.
Well, we've been at this for quite a while at this particular site that I'm going to be talking mostly about tonight. But I am going to tell you a little bit about some work we did early on, because I think that sort of sets up the later work and it gives us some things to compare to. And it's, you know, trying to understand how urbanization affects these animals is really challenging. And we've gone about it a whole bunch of different ways. And it's not only about tiger rattlesnakes tonight, mostly about that, because that's what we've done the most with. But I'll also be talking some about some work we've done with Gila monsters and the snake community at Stone Canyon. And we've actually done a whole bunch of other things that I could have talked about, but there's just not enough time. So I tried to pick out some you know, ones that I thought might be more interesting. And, you know, when you've been working in a place as long as we have, I actually started working out in the Tortolitas in 1995, doing work on looking at effects of habitat destruction associated with collecting. And then it became a long-term study site to look at urbanization. And, you know, there's been a lot of people, I mean, many people that have worked on this project, but some of the ones who have really been important to it, taken the lead, are people like Jeff and Melissa, who I know a lot of you know and probably remember when they were back in Tucson. They've gone on to have their own outstanding research careers. Mickey Parker was my right-hand man for many years. He's just now finishing up his PhD at the University of Texas, Texas A&M, sorry. And then I had an era where I had a lot of there you go. Oh, well, I said some nice things about a few people there, but they might not have heard me. But anyway, I've been collaborating now with some really smart people. It took me a while to figure that out, you know, that I should probably collaborate with people a lot smarter than me. And it turned out there was plenty of those folks around. And so I've been working with people like Javin Bowder, Max Jones, Ryan Hanscom, Anthony Palicki, Mike Dreslick, and these guys are basically statistical gurus, which I find to be an essential, you know, group of people to collaborate with. And the staff at the Stone Canyon Club has been amazing to us. They provided us with trailers, they provide us with golf carts, things like that. And the HOA out there has helped us, you know, have permission. And the residents of Stone Canyon, who are steadily growing, somehow have managed to put up with us all these years, and we haven't really gotten sideways with anybody too bad, which is kind of amazing, because we went from having a few residents to like hundreds now, right? And then the funding for this has come a lot from the Arizona Game and Fish Department. Most of it, I would say, the bulk, the Green Fund here, the NIFWIF USGA Wildlife Links Program. That's the United States Golf Association. You got to be a good salesman if you can con those guys into business. The National Park Service, and the big one over the last several years is the Wallace Research Foundation, who has generously supported our work. And we've essentially developed this project. Mostly it's been an undergraduate-led project, getting data on a reduced amount of data on certain aspects of the project, because we just can't keep doing everything out there without the funding. So I've sort of like developed some things that I felt like might be able to good to look at long term. I'm not sure why it's not advancing.
Now try it.
There it goes. So I am going to talk about this guy, the tiger rattlesnake, and I've probably a lot of people in this room have heard me talk about them before. When I first started working on them, nobody had really done much at all with them. Dan Beck had done a little bit of work, but you know, now they're probably one of the most well-studied rattlesnakes in the world because of all the work we've done. But probably also, you know, we need to get some more publications out. I spend a lot of time getting grant proposals and not enough time publishing the papers. And so that's one of the reasons, now that I'm getting long in the tooth, you know, and getting tired of chasing money. We're starting to really work harder to get some of these results published. And so, you know, I've tried to throw in some of our more recent analytical findings into this talk. And then Gila monsters are another species we've worked a lot with. That we just happen to be in a place where there's more Gila monsters, and I can't imagine there being more Gila monsters anywhere else than there is at Stone Canyon. I think we're up to 900 captures of Gila monsters, and so I'll be telling you a little bit about them. And then, you know, I'm going to talk a little bit about the 3 rattlesnakes that occur at this particular site, Stone Canyon. And how we've been able to see sort of changes, I think important changes in relative abundance of these species, which may really be starting to give us more and more of an idea of how we think things might turn out or where they're headed when it comes to sort of community dynamics or changes within the snake assemblage brought on by urbanization. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the species diversity sort of aspect. That's not something I'll be talking a lot about tonight because we haven't really started to delve into it as much. We have a little bit. I'm very fortunate that I have an intern who just came to Tucson, who's here tonight, Pauline Urban. She's from France, and she's part of the France Tucson Institute, and she's going to sort of tackle some of that. So I'm excited about that. But, you know, we have 21 species of snakes at this particular site. And they range everything from these little guys, you know, to really, we actually get a good number of coral snakes out there. So we got cool stuff. Might not expect there to be a lot of these since they're probably feeding very high at a very high trophic level, but we do find a fair number. We have tons of lyre snakes. Many people are just really thrilled to see a lyre snake, and they're hard to come by, but I believe we got to be approaching 600 or so captures. Yeah.
Just see, people can't see on Zoom.
Robert, while you're there,
Yeah.
when you click off on the X of the participant enabled closed caption, that little message is going to be.
I think that fixed it. Let me get it away. But
Oh, my apologies.
that's
Yeah.
That's not your fault.
Is everybody on Zoom can now see the images? Hopefully.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then we also have snakes like spotted leaf-nosed snakes. I don't know what this low desert stinking hot species is doing up in the Tortolita Mountains, but we found 2 so far. How these animals persist in such low numbers, I'll never know. But you know, they count the same as any other species when you're looking at species diversity, right? Do we need to admit that? Okay.
I'm admitting them.
Okay, we're good to go?
Yep.
You know, I do want to kind of talk about a little bit of big picture stuff first. This is probably why I never get through my talks, because I kind of riff sometimes. And but there's sort of a concept or a big picture idea, you know, and it's sort of like the way we try to preserve, you know, biodiversity in nature. And I think one of the main ways we've always tried to do that is kind of what I call, other people have called reservation ecology, where we essentially put a fence around. We might not even put a fence around it, right? We have an area where we don't go in there and we try not to mess it up too bad. And of course, you know, things like climate change don't care about fences, right? So, you know, it's not going to do everything you hope it will. But, you know, it's been a good way to sort of set aside land. Now, it does result in a lot of fragmentation over time. This is Tucumcari Hill looking down onto the, I would say in Tohono, but I don't think my pronunciation would be as good as Robert's. But anyway, I used to work up there a lot. My lab was up there for many years. And so we did a lot of work up there, and you have a pretty full complement of species still on Tucumcari Hill that you would expect there. But anyway, that's kind of like the reservation ecology idea. You know, we want to set aside as much land as we can. And I think that's still what we want to do, right? But that's getting harder and harder because there's a lot more people on Earth. Next slide. Or no, that's me. Sorry. Restoration ecology is another thing that we do, right? And This one isn't probably as good, right? Because you mess something up and you want to try to put the pieces back together again. And we all know how complex these systems are. And, I'd probably challenge you to tell me, where we've had really good, successful, large scale restoration projects. They're very few and far between. This is, a golf course that they're letting go back to wild, but it's never going to be like it was, right? I mean, there's going to be invasive species there, and some of the species that were there have probably dropped out. And so restoration ecology is, I'm not saying we shouldn't be doing that. I think we should, but it's challenging. And then there's this idea of reconciliation ecology. I first got this idea from my good friend Mike Rosenzweig, and he wrote a book called Win-Win Ecology, where he discussed a lot about this concept. And it really sort of grabbed me, even though it's kind of like, I guess I have sort of a cynical view sometimes, but it's sort of like, well, we need to live alongside all these species, right? We need to do the best we can, maximize the biodiversity values, even in human-built environments. And this photograph or this image depicts Jerusalem, and you can see that there's these rare falcons that are nesting in these roof structures and stuff, and that ends up being important to the preservation of this species. And there's other examples of that, and another one from Israel actually that was shrikes, that were the shrike populations were plummeting of certain species. And they realized that they'd cut down all the trees and there wasn't anywhere for the shrikes to perch, right? So they put up these poles and the shrike population started doing better and coming back. So, sometimes the reconciliation ecology might be somewhat serendipitous, but I think a lot of times if we really think about it, there's all kinds of things we can do that promote biodiversity, right? Even in the human-built environment. And I guess at my most cynical, I think, that at least even if it ends up being a depauperate number of common sort of weedy species, at least we'll have that sort of biological diversity that we need in order to, after they go through whatever, god awful impending bottlenecks we probably will go through on this planet, we'll have, the raw material to re-diversify out the other side. Now, that's a very, very long view, right? But I think we have to take that long view. Problem is humans aren't good at that, right? We can barely, handle our own lives. That's already a really long time, but it's nothing when it comes to this stuff. Okay, let's talk about what we've been doing. I've been studying at different sites, and this is mostly places where we've studied tiger rattlesnakes. And again, that's what I'll focus on more than anything. But I wanted to give you a little context. We started working on them out in the Rincon Mountains, and some of you might have seen me present on some of these data. There was a site we had there that was inside the national park. Is it the middle one? Yeah. And Tinker Verde Ridge, a lot of you know where that is. And then there was this other site, the Rock and Cave Ranch, which is going to be developed, right? And my idea was if we can see what's going on with some tiger rattlesnakes here, where they're going to, there's going to be development, compare that over here inside the park where there's not, then maybe we could see what some of the changes might be. And we'd have like a basic sort of, before, after, control, impact kind of study, which is a pretty powerful way to go about that. And so we set about doing that. And, the main tool with snakes is radio telemetry, and this is something I started doing way back in 1982. Actually, the transmitters were a lot bigger back then. It was kind of gruesome, about the size of a film vial. You're kind of stuffing into a snake, but they have actually really revolutionized the study of snakes, because now we can follow these guys around if we want to, moment by moment, and go find them, right? See what they're doing. And, mostly if you were to just catch a snake, mark it, and put it back out in the wild again, you'd probably never see it again. And it's kind of hard to learn a lot about that, right? So telemetry has been a really important tool. And at this particular study site here, where we have the Tinker Verde Ridge, which is coming down, and the Rock and Cave Ranch, we spent 5 years out there messing around, studying tiger rattlesnakes. And the different colors you see are all the point from the telemetered animals in any given year. One of the things that always pops out in everybody, whoops, those buttons are kind of close together. My thumbs are large. You notice how they don't go over the road here. Hang on, what's the name of this road? Help me. Thank you. I've only been on it 80 billion times. Yeah, I'm getting old, man. And then, so we have what's going on here is a couple of different sites where we studied these animals. And it was really interesting, you know, if I would have stopped after the first couple of years studying them at Tinker Verde Ridge, that's what we usually do, right? With research, we just kind of a couple of years, that's about the life of a graduate student doing a master's, and you know, might have been the two most anomalous years weather-wise that we've ever seen. And we know how variable the weather is in the Sonoran Desert. And then we'd stop and say, well, that's what makes, you know, tiger rattlesnakes tick. We kind of know something about them now. But I found out by studying multiple populations over the years that are at different sites, and that we've found that what we think about it's like being a tiger rattlesnake has changed a lot over the years. And you know, that local adaptation that occurs is just so critical. You might see differences that are greater among two populations of the same species subjected to different environments than you would see between two completely different species, right? So it's really important. So what's a tiger rattlesnake basically do? This is a male. They spend all their time in one little den, and then they do that in the springtime. They'll come out a little bit, and then sure enough, they'll go, and as soon as the monsoons hit, they'll start getting very active. And that's what I mean here. Wet summer, this is their range. This is kind of the rest of the year, spring. After they come back to their den, they'll hang out a little bit. And so what's going on there? Well, they're obviously, their movements are driven a lot by monsoon rainfall. And what they're doing is they spend a lot of time in these washes. And the males, this is a male, he's looking for females, right? That's what snakes do. And he's finding females in here. He's mating with one here. He mates with one here. He mates with one down over here. Mates with one over here, right? And mates with multiple females, and then comes right back around and goes in that exact same hole in the ground. And I'm guessing a lot of you have seen this same pattern with a lot of other snake species. Tigers they really do it a lot. And you know, these movements are driven by these monsoon storms. And of course, we all know how incredibly localized they can be. So you could end up with snakes being very active at one site and not hardly doing anything, barely even coming out yet at another site not far away. And so you can get a lot of variation on the landscape that way. And we also know now, you know, I'm only showing a few examples because there's dozens that would fill up the whole screen. But one thing we found out very quickly, and this is very common among rattlesnakes that have been studied, is that males have much bigger home range sizes than females do. The males have, their home ranges are somewhere around 12 to 15 hectares. And so the females are maybe 2 or 3 hectares, right? And so basically what's going on there is these females are sitting tight, waiting for a male to come find them. And we would predict this in this kind of a polygynous mating system where males are the bigger risk takers. They're out looking for females, and the females are sitting tight, waiting to find a good male. And, you know, oftentimes maybe 2 males will find that female at the same time, and then we can expect some male-male combat, for example. So that is really probably what's driving this extreme variation in movement patterns between males and females. And it sets up a whole bunch of other predictions about what these snakes are doing, how they're ticking, different things that you can look into to better understand their ecology. This is a tiger and a male and a female that I found them mating in a creosote bush, and I can tell this is one of my snakes because it has the painted rattle. I also knew because I radio tracked it to this site. And I was lucky that day that it was with a male. This male is actually introminant. They're in copulo. You can see by this large bulge here. And I decided to wait and, see how long it took. And it literally took 6.5 hours for them to be finished. And then I stepped back and I decided I was going to catch that male. And that ended up being the one I showed you, number 45. And he went around and mated with several other females before it was time to go down the den. So, we're learning stuff about these animals. Of course, that's the result of mating, hopefully, right? turns out tiger rattlesnakes very likely have multiple paternity. Females are also promiscuous. They mate with multiple males. But, and I've done a lot of genetic analysis, none of which I'll be talking about tonight. But yeah, they're an interesting little critter. And they're fitting a lot with a lot of the patterns we see of temperate, North American rattlesnakes. And one of the things we also found is that, it takes a good year for them to really be reproductively active. And 98 was a very good year. And we see all these different mating behaviors that we didn't see in other years very often. So not only, so basically what that implicates is these guys they're mating not every year, right? They're mating every second, third, maybe even fourth year, right? So that means that when those males are out looking for females, some fairly large percentage of them they're probably not even receptive to the males. So they really are out there looking for a scarce resource. And again, that's really important to understand their movement ecology and all the other aspects of their behavior, essentially. Because, obviously the bottom line is making little copies of themselves. That's really what they're after. And I'm going to move you to the Stone Canyon site and try to go a little quicker. I hope I'm already not talking too fast. I'm also have a very dry mouth, so.
You're doing great.
Can't believe you don't have beer at these things. I talk a lot better when I've had a couple beers. But anyway, so now I'm going to show you the Stone Canyon site. It's a very, very rocky place, obviously, right? And I guess maybe that's why they call it Stone Canyon. I don't see any really canyons out there, but lots of stones. And it's just a truly amazing place. I've always thought they should have made it Saguaro National Park. But anyway, this is the kind of habitat that these animals like, the kind of landscape that they like are these rocky foothill areas. And, Gila monsters are like that too. We have a suite of species which sort of like that mid-elevation rocky outcrop. And that's right in, our beloved Arizona upland, Sonoran Desert prime time. And so, it's not clicking again for some reason.
Oh, click on the screen with the mouse. No.
Oh,
The mouse
Okay.
on the screen.
there we go. Turns out people like these places too. And because they're beautiful, right? And so you can see here that at Stone Canyon itself, there's still a lot of room. The way they build their houses out there, they tend to build them within a small area. They like to leave many of the rock outcrops in the places they can. They have fairly large lot sizes, 2 to 4, acres or more, but they only build in this one little small spot. And there's some pretty nice homes out there, like $5 million, $6 million homes out there. And so these big lots, with a lot of intact desert around, right? And so when you look across, the valley, you can see that, it feels to me almost like it's marching my way, and more development, right? Arizona's got a climate everybody loves. It's been one of the fastest growing states. Tucson's been one of the fastest growing cities for a long, long time now. And here you can even see how people, you can tell where the Forest Service boundary is, can't you? So, people really like this area. It's grown a lot. I call it terracotta tile hell. And so this is what Stone Canyon is going to look like at some point. This is the plat for what the footprint of the development will look like. When it's completely built out, it's 700 plus homes. And when we first started going out there, actually 2002, but we didn't really get going. We got out there kind of late that year, but in 2003, there were 31 houses out there. But very few of them were up in this major golf course area. They were more down in this area. This golf course actually recently closed, and they're going to turn it into a natural area. I think they already have. I don't know who's been working on that. I heard some people I know might be interested in helping them out. But anyway, so yeah, not very many houses out there. 2002, there were like 3 or 4, right? But the interesting thing is they built this golf course and they put all the infrastructure in. So there were all these roads out there, paved roads that you could drive around on. It's a gated community. So, there was nobody driving around out there. There's nobody else going to find the snakes before you do. And we went out there and we just caught lots and lots of snakes. And they weren't run over. So that is how it all sort of started. We started putting radio transmitters. This is what it looks like now. Actually, it's a little more so. I just heard there's 300 and almost 350 houses out there now that are completed. And there are about 100, roughly 100 under construction. So they're getting there. And they're going to now start building out some of these areas out here. These areas weren't going to build there for the longest time because during the housing bubble, you know, I think the people that were speculating on that land went broke essentially. But now things are rolling again. So, you know, we've got kind of an interesting situation to compare. You know, of course, you know, the thing about Stone Canyon is that it's a way different than the regular desert. You know, it's got, there's a massive input of water, and all of these plants are on drip irrigation, and that's the way it is all along all the fairways. That's the way it is all on the roads. And so it's kind of this sort of weird, I guess, what would you call it? Semi-natural experiment that we're kind of looking at. I mean, it has a huge problem, right? So we suffer from an N of one when it comes to the spatially, right? It's just Stone Canyon,
Yeah.
But we do have some comparisons we can make with some of those earlier places that I'll tell you about. But anyway, Stone Canyon's unique also in that it rains a lot out there, right? And it rains like every day, and it rains twice a day, every day. So there's a lot of water out there, and you know, it's been really interesting to see how the snakes responded to that. And these are some data that show this. You know, you can see that we don't get rain in April and May here very often, right? But you know, the golf course certainly does. And so essentially you have this, because of this input of water, it's ameliorated the potential effects of drought that we have, which we know can be quite important, you know, especially in April and May during this sort of dry summer or summer period. How do we go out and do this? Well, we go out on golf carts. It's pretty rough duty. And I'm only talking about how we get our hands on animals. We've done so many different things out there. But one of the things we do, because we have this golf cart path that we can follow, and it's never changed, right? So we got this perfect transect to go on, find tons of snakes on it. And so we go around there and we catch snakes at night. Now, this is one of my former students, Josie. It's not night, but it's getting there. We go out a little bit before. Here's Diego, one of my good buddies who used to work with me. He's out there now catching a snake. He's now in law school, so I don't bet he's not having as much fun. And so, you know, then we take him back to the lab, and it's like an alien abduction, right? we do terrible things to them. We anesthetize all our snakes. You really have to, in order to, if you want to get accurate enough data to do growth analyses and stuff, it's absolutely essential that you anesthetize the snake. You can't get an accurate snout bend length on them otherwise. I think it's also, you know, very important for stress on not only the snake, but on the person handling the snake. If you're wondering what she's doing there, she's got the snake intubated and she's, you know, reviving it. A snake will rebreathe some of the isoflurane that gets into its bloodstream, and they'll tend to stay down. Luckily, snakes can withstand a very high plane, a deep plane of anesthesia, which allows, you know, hacks like me to even work on them. And so we've processed a lot of animals over the years. And there's my love image, tiger rattlesnake, with small head and the big rattle. Just really basic stuff about them, even at the, you know, so now we're looking at some site variation, and we can see really, you know, essentially very important life history traits like body size. If you notice here, we have enough snakes at Stone Canyon. We're able to look at some of them were not associated with the golf course. And then we looked at those ones that are, and the ones that are away from the golf course, they tend to be larger, right? Now, they could have been that way before, but I suspect something's going on there. We've done some growth analyses. It's kind of an older way that we used to do growth analyses using an ANCOVA, and you have to use the initial snout vent length of the animal because they grow, right? Little snakes, shorter snakes grow more than older snakes. But anyway, you can see here that there's really nothing going on when you look at these three sites, which might be a little surprising. We might think they're growing more at Stone Canyon, right? With all that resources. And sure enough, if you tease those out and look at them separately on and off, we do see that. And, something in this case, you got a 650 millimeter animal that's just barely growing. These, I didn't put my units on here. I see Dr. Harlow in the audience. I'm sure he would not be happy about, I'd get some points taken off for that for sure. But anyway, this may be a little bit over zero, but then this guy's, growing up there around somewhere getting close to 2 millimeters a month. So those are millimeters. We've done some more recent growth analyses, and I really wanted to talk a lot about this, and I decided it was kind of boring and this wasn't really the best audience for it, so I did, so I'm not gonna. But I am going to show you a little something here that the males actually grow more than the females. You guys can probably guess why that is, right? Like it takes a female a lot longer. This is reproductive maturity, somewhere around 515 millimeters. It's roughly the same for both sexes. But these females, they're probably putting a lot more energy into reproduction, right? And they're not putting it into growth. Although there probably is very strong fecundity selection on these guys, because the bigger a female is, the more babies she can have. So there's a lot more going on there than meets the eye. And that's something we'll talk about another time when we get a chance to think a little bit more about it, do some other more detailed analyses. These are some very similar analyses. We're fitting this to a growth curve that allows you to do this. I can never say the guy's name. Somebody help me out. Bertalanffy, is that how you say that? The growth curve. But anyway, so you can see here that the males and the non-gravid females, they're actually their growth rates they're doing pretty good. They're about the same, but it's these gravid females that are not growing very much. So when we compare something like growth, we can't just put all the snakes into the same pot. There's a lot of different things going on there, the difference between a male rattlesnake and a female rattlesnake. I mean, they might as well be two completely separate species, right? So there's so much going on there. But I find this interesting, and these snakes are putting an incredible amount of energy into growing. And it's taken them a long time. They're probably very much, lifetime breeders. They save up all their energy. They get enough capital stored up, and then they can give birth. And that's a lot different than another strategy of an animal that might be to get big really fast and have as many babies as you can. Tiger rattlesnakes have real small litter sizes, and they are decidedly extreme capital breeders, I would say. And here we also try to look at some diet stuff. Now, this is all real basic natural history stuff, but I think it's really important for us to better understand these animals. And you can see that if I would have stopped after the first 2 years of Stone Canyon, I'd have told you that tiger rattlesnakes eat mostly rodents, right? When I say mammal, it's small mammals, right? Rodents essentially, and lizards. But 4 kilometers away at that Tanque Verde site that I showed you earlier, they're actually eating there as well, more mammals. There for a while, it looked like they were, sorry, I said that wrong. Tanque Verde, more mammals, Rock and Cay, more lizards, right? And then Stone Canyon is the later population where they're eating a lot more rodents. That's the developed site. Is everybody clear on that, those 3 sites? I think that's pretty interesting when you see something as fundamental as diet change in a population, 2 different populations of the same organism that's only separated by, 4 kilometers.
So are there fewer lizards at Stone Canyon?
Yes.
Or they prefer there are fewer lizards?
As far as we can tell, lizards, it's really hard to get really good, robust estimates of how many lizards are there. Small mammals are much easier, but the rocks are just much better out there. There's a lot more lizards running around Rock and Cay. Based on count data.
Is that from, do you think the irrigated plants are sort of shading all the basking sites?
Here at Stone Canyon, I think that's certainly possible. I just think there's a massive increase of water there. So primary productivity is clearly kind of going through the roof. And these rodents are seed eaters. I guess Anicomes might not, but the grasshopper mouse might not, all the other ones. So let's look some more. Get some cool pictures of snakes eating stuff. Tiger rattlesnakes can't eat very big stuff because they got little heads, or maybe they got big bodies. I'm not sure. Here's a tiger rattlesnake choking down a wood rat or a pack rat, Neotoma. That's probably a juvenile, I think. There's some gray in its pelage there, but anyway, you can see that snake's probably really at really reached his limit here, his gape limit. And they're gape limited predators, right? And that actually, there are some really interesting things going on with snakes, what they can eat, and allometric relationships. That's another talk for another day. We've also tried to figure out, all about their breeding. I should have keep that up there a little longer. How much time do I have? When did I start?
You got plenty of time, keep going.
I think you started at like 7.
15.
So I've gone already. Do you guys want to take a break? Because I find my voice puts people to sleep. So, you want to get up and stretch or something like that, because
Keep going.
yeah, okay, all right. Yeah, maybe that's just me. I fall asleep at every talk I go to. Okay, if I start nodding off up here, let me know. Okay, I don't want to hit the ground. I'll hit the podium here, So this is actually some ultrasound stuff. Dale DiNardo, some of you probably know Dale from ASU. He's like a genius physiological ecologist, and he's helped us sort of figure out what's going on with reproduction. Now, when we anesthetize those snakes, we can palpate them quite well, and you can tell how many ova they have, even when the ova are very small, not very well developed, and they're still in the ovaries. You can tell, you can feel them. Then they ovulate, and they come into their oviducts, and they get bigger and bigger, and then they actually get a little bit harder when they get really well formed, right? As the embryo starts to develop, because they get all squishy. It's kind of hard to tell them apart. But anyway, we're able to look at also using ultrasound. Turns out we're actually quite good with our palpations. We're very accurate with that for the most part. But so, when you think about like differences and how the development might be affecting the reproduction of tiger rattlesnakes. And again, I couldn't overemphasize how important reproduction is, right? That's kind of the bottom line. Then if you were to use the percentage of female tiger rattlesnakes that you captured, and you were able to see how many of those were gravid or pregnant, same thing in an oviparous snake like this, then you would see that there's a much higher percentage, over 50, what is that, close even maybe to 60% of these females you're catching out there are gravid when you catch them. That means they're getting, they're gonna have babies. And so, that might equate to something like giving birth more than every other year. Does that make sense? If half of them are, more than half are pregnant in any given year, and that would be pretty amazing. And we've had snakes on the golf course who gave birth annually. They gave birth in 2, even one time 3 successive years. If you take these snakes from some of these other sites, 25%, maybe they're only giving birth every 4 years. That surprised me. I worked on snakes up in Wyoming, prairie rattlesnakes, and it didn't surprise us there, that this extreme periodicity in reproductive frequency where animals are only giving birth once every 4 or 5 years. There are snake species living in the Arctic Circle, Viipariborus, up in Sweden, that are what is called simiparous, which means they only give birth once in their entire life. And that's because that climate that they live in is very difficult, to acquire the resources they need in order to be able to give birth. And sometimes after they give birth, it's so hard on them, they may die. So it's extreme. It's probably based, well, I'm not going to go into that because that's like 6 other talks. I am going to show you a little data on some litter sizes where Stone Canyon on these golf course snakes actually have larger litter sizes. You might notice that these snakes have really small litter sizes. Tiger rattlesnakes do have small litter sizes. I fear that these are a little smaller than maybe they ought to be, and that's probably because these guys are carrying radio transmitters in their body. And I don't want to go into that, but we have other evidence that shows that there are definitely some negative effects from having a transmitter. I'm not going to stop using them because they've revolutionized the study of snakes, but I think they can lead to issues, and I think we need to be much better at trying to look at how are having slim-littered animals affecting the quality of our data, right? People don't typically want to study that because we don't want to study what's messing our animals up. That's no fun, right? So anyway, here's a tiger rattlesnake that I put that I tracked for 12 years, same guy. And I think this is like 7 different surgery scars. You can't even really tell them out too good, but 1, 2, 3, whatever. I'm kind of making it up. That's probably one for sure, right? But that's about how long they are. So, you can, if you have to take the transmitter out of the snake before it runs out of batteries, and then you could put a new one in there. And that way you can continue to radio track them around. But, I'm not sure if I know anybody who's radio tracked the same individual snakes for that long. We definitely have a nice data set. We have quite a few animals we track for quite a while. We also have a lot of animals we only track for a couple of years. So this is the radio telemetry data set. Actually, I think this may be a little bit wrong, but whatever. We've been tracking a lot of snakes, and we've certainly went out and found them a lot, over 10,000 fixes. And so, we're trying to learn what we can from that. And, when you take some of these ways of measuring the movement patterns of snakes and quantifying that, is one of the things you can look at is how far do they move per day. And this is a thing called MCP, which is their kind of home range size. And these are in hectares, right? These Stone Canyon animals seem to have smaller home ranges. And this is like a different kind of home range estimator. It's called an active kernel. And here you can see again, they have the smallest. But what I found interesting is this is where they spend 50% of their time, right? 50% active kernel. And it's much smaller at the golf course than it is on these other sites at the Rocky Cay and the Stone Canyon. I'm guessing they just don't need to go as far to find what they want. Now, I guess it could also possibly be related to the high density of animals there. Might be some artifact of mating, some density dependent thing, but I'm pretty sure, I'm thinking they just don't have to go as far. And when you look at what the sort of their movements look like, this is those kernel things and active kernel home range estimators. And when you have these rings like this, those are like showing you where they're focusing their time. And they like the golf course features of the golf course. They like the edges of the golf course. They never go out on the fairways, almost never. But they like the edges because they're pumping water over there. You get sprayed from the golf course, and then you also have these emitters. What do you call it?
Spaghetti water.
Yeah, help me out. Drip irrigation, and that goes out about 10 meters away from the course, and they like that. I thought rodents would really like that too. You know what? They kind of don't. I think they don't like it when it's really dense in there. So that's a bit of a disconnect that I'm still trying to figure out. But anyway, that's what it looks like in some of these places. Stone Canyon's actually done pretty good with native species. There isn't a real bad bunch of non-native species out there. Does anybody know what this grass is?
Non-native.
It's non-native. It's like, yeah. So there is some places where you have that, but yeah.
You can see how happy the mesquite is with all those pods.
Yeah. And the ragweed. Yeah. And of course, other animals like that. There's a lot of bobcats out there. Look at how huge that brittle bush is. So it's just kind of one of these places, it's like paradise, but there may be some evil on the horizon.
Yeah.
So I'll talk about that in a minute if I don't run out of time. So these are the movement patterns of one of these snakes. This is a female. And one of the things we started seeing right off the bat is they're obviously avoiding the fairway, and you can kind of see this here. Here this is a little bit hard to interpret. These snakes were not found on the top of that house. That's where they were before there was a house, right? And then they put a house in there, and you can see the yellow dots are like after the house was built. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, so they're moving away from that. And it's like, here's another gigantic house right here. And look at all the, it's like, where are they going to go? And looking at, again, one of these kernels, you can see, I don't know how good this screen looks horrible. These pictures are much better than this, which is kind of disappointing. The University of Arizona needs to spend a little more money on their facilities, apparently. This is my home apartment right here. But anyway, there's, you can see all these houses. There's some in here, and the snakes kind of like going in areas where there aren't houses up here. And so he's, it seems like he's kind of picking the places where people aren't a little bit. And then look at all these houses that are starting to come in here. Now this is, a couple years later, and you can see that he's really shifted. Actually, this is, the first one was 03 and this is 08. He's shifting over here, maybe not as many houses. Don't know if he's going to get much luck up here. And so, one of the things that is interesting about this to me is that, where are these snakes going to go? And at what point will they run out of space, and how will that affect their densities and things like that? Or is there just so much resources out there that the carrying capacity exists to allow there to be a lot more snakes per unit area? These kind of things are not easy to understand and quantify, but we've actually been working on a new approach using these Brownian bridge movement models. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. It just sounds really fancy, but it's like basically looking at where the snake goes, and you look at how far it went, and you look at the direction it went. And you do that for each successive movement, and then you can build a predictive distribution of where the snake is gonna go, where you would think it's gonna go, right? And so these movement models, we've been using them a lot on king cobras in Thailand and India. And it's really helping us better understand their resource use and stuff. So with the king cobras, we always were sort of data limited, but with, we have so many snakes here. So I've got this genius guy who I'm working with who just finished his PhD. I was on his committee, and he's been helping me do some of this stuff, he's been doing it. I've been helping him. And so he's got these movement models, and basically what he's been able to find out is that, just like you would expect, but now we're able to actually quantify it. These snakes are really starting to, they're being pinched. Their movements are being pinched, and by features, anthropogenic features, essentially, the golf course, houses, and roads. This is number 200, a male that I tracked for a long time. And this is in 2002. Where does it say that? I thought it said that on here somewhere. Supposed to. That got left off. That's Anthony's fault, I think, because he was helping me with that. Anthony was supposed to help me cut back my presentation, and the thing I got actually more slides. So if I do end up going over, you know who to talk to. So yeah, anyway. Oops. So this is, you can see now that this animal is starting to shift in over here, and the gray, these are the houses. It's kind of hard to see because there's so much going on. He's kind of shifting over here away from where all these new houses were built. This is 2008, and now by 2013, this is a nice thing, being able to follow a snake for a long time. That you can see here that he's now really kind of pushed up into this area where they're not building. There's no houses up there, kind of going up into here. There are houses, but I don't know. There's going to be houses up there too, probably someday. So we'll see what happens. But right now, we've got a lot of compelling data to show us that their movement patterns are being very much influenced by the anthropogenic disturbance that in their environment.
Can you tell if they're being stressed by that?
I don't know how you would do that unless you were, a hormone person and you could get out there and somehow devise some way to look at, corticosteroids and snakes that are in areas like that compared to other areas. I think something like that could definitely work. I don't know if it work in this particular situation, but snakes in an area where there's a lot more anthropogenic disturbance compared to not. Maybe that's been done. Anybody know of any studies like that? Hank, do you maybe? No. Yeah. So yeah, that would be interesting. Maybe Stone Canyon's kind of like what people have referred to as an ecological trap. So, we got these snakes, they're having more babies, they're bigger, there's all these wonderful things going on. And it's like, so I guess my recommendation is we just need to build more golf courses in the desert, right? But I don't think anybody wants that. So I think it's really important for us to have a more nuanced view of the situation. And I think it may be such that we're giving these snakes everything they want and everything they need to thrive. Although I have some survival estimates that are hot off the press that would show you they're not necessarily surviving as much as we thought. I'm gonna show you something here in a minute. Again, if I don't run out of time, how much time do I have?
You want, keep going. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's what you guys say, because you're still awake. Those guys back there might be asleep by now. But an ecological trap is a kind of a compelling concept. We're giving these animals everything that they need, but we're kind of leading them to the slaughter, so to speak. Turns out there aren't very many good examples of ecological traps in nature. They're one of the best one I know, and I think even these guys themselves debate whether it's truly an ecological trap or not, are the Cooper's hawks in Tucson. And Bill Manning and his students have been studying those for a long time. You know, where these Cooper's hawks are all over Tucson, you see them everywhere. There's a million doves for them to eat, but the doves have, you know, trichomoniasis. Cooper's hawks, the fledglings eat it. There's no feedback on the parents, you know, to say, well, this isn't a good place. So that could be an ecological trap. This could be something like that. Could be that because we're bringing these snakes in closer and closer contact to humans, and not only humans, but a growing population of humans, we should expect there to be potentially more problems with snakes. When rattlesnakes and humans meet up, they, you know, rattlesnakes don't usually come out the better, you know, when we have those kinds of interactions. We do have some mortality out there, but it is surprisingly low. This is a snake that was captured there on the road, got killed by some probably construction workers, because this is a big yard where they do a lot of, you know, dirt work and stuff. And I think the construction workers are the main guys. Most of the people who live out there, because we've been giving talks out there for years and years, and we have a good relationship with these people, I don't think very many of them are killing snakes, even though they've got a whole bag full of good snake killers when they're out there playing golf, right? I think they really actually kind of, I don't think like their snakes, but they've been really good to work with. And you know, this is an example of like these snakes, where the triangle is the den of the tiger rattlesnake. He's moving across the road, coming down onto the golf course, moving across. And here you can see this is early days because the road hasn't even been revegetated or anything. But the snakes are still crossing that road, although we're getting less and less crossing this road. Now, many, many years later, 20 years later, we don't get those kind of numbers, and maybe they got whacked, right? But we don't see a lot of road mortality out there. Why? Because these guys aren't there when snakes are active. This is mostly a winter resident, snowbird kind of situation. People with their big, you know, third home or whatever down here in the desert, and they come down in the wintertime to golf, and the snakes aren't out then. So that's a big part of it. Another part of it is, you know, people tend to drive fairly slow on these roads. Another part of it is people, I think actually our message has kind of gotten through, to be honest with you. I think people aren't as ready to kill these snakes as they might be in other places. So the other thing that is probably really helping is you saw what the place looks like. You've seen in some pictures where you got this house and then you got a big lot. So there's actually still a lot of good intact desert out in this environment. When we did some analyses looking at land cover types, I think it's something like 7% change in what the landscape is like from 02 to like now. And that's almost all from houses. So it's interesting. It's also anomalous and also therefore challenging to draw inferences from, right? This is a snake that was moving a lot across the road, like this 2 or 3 weeks worth of movements. And that's what happened to him. So we have had some mortality. This was a 184. He got run over. And now I'm going to switch to Gila monsters. Sorry for the abrupt switch, but I guess we got a little bit of time left. And we've also done a lot of work with Gila monsters out there. I'm going to show you some data just on their relative abundance. And when I say relative abundance, it just means we haven't marked, we have them marked and recaptured them. And we have just recently produced estimates of their actual abundance, which you can do with mark and recapture data. And there is some error associated with that, but we're finding very similar pattern with that. Now we need to subject that to these similar kinds of analyses where we're looking at, you know, the years this should be houses. It turns out it's going to be essentially the exact same relationship because year and houses are very, very highly correlated with each other. Obviously, the more time that's gone by, the more houses we got. If you look at what's going on with the houses here, you see it's very linear, right? And then you look and see what's going on with the Gila monsters. The ones we catch on the road, because we do road surveys and cart path surveys, we can see that they're continuing to increase. And Anthony gave me he helped me with a lot of stuff, as he always does, but I think I didn't switch out the graph because I think he had to 2022 as well. So it seems like it's still going, right? And it definitely is still going. And so we have the, this increase in Gila monsters, even though we got all these houses come in. It's pretty counterintuitive, right? Probably for this. Well, yeah, there probably are. I haven't studied quail, but I would not doubt it.
Because they feed quail.
And I want to talk a little bit about some other things we did. Now I'm going to get a little bit fragmented, but just things that I think I hope they're interesting, and they tell us a little something about urbanization effects. But these are a whole bunch of like MCP polygons, and every one of these would represent a Gila monster that we track for several years. And this is kind of their whole area that they use. And all we're doing is just connecting the outermost dots there. There's more sophisticated ways to do that, like I've shown you. But these are a whole bunch of them from the golf course. And then I had a grad student who was working with Chris Dinger, who's like one of these, he's like a Gila monster god, I call him. And he had a student who I gave him my data, and then Del Donardo gave him some of his Gila monster data. And Dale worked on Gila monsters out on the other side of the Tortolita Mountains in the Owlhead Buttes area. Many of you have probably been there. And his Gila monsters were just out there roaming around in the stinking hot desert. My Gila monsters were hanging out at Stone Canyon, living in the lap of luxury. And if you look, and there's a bunch of other data we could discuss, but just to get the upshot, look at the area that these animals are using. We're calling it subsidized environment, Stone Canyon. And these are in hectares, so about a 10-hectare home range up to whatever. And then look at the females and the males, right? And then look at this, the females, males, much, much bigger. Probably, again, they have a lot farther to go to. Now, problem with this, these data are from 2003, and my data are from much, several years later. So these data are not contemporaneously collected. That's problematic, but I think the differences are big enough for us to draw sort of, I'd probably go out on a limb and say there's something going on there. And the same here, but the different measurement. This is that KDE, I forget what that stands for, but the kernel density estimator or whatever it is. So you can see there's a big difference between Gila monsters living in Stone Canyon and Gila monsters living out in the hot desert, away from all the luxury. I'm going to tell you another little. Now, does anybody remember when Mickey Parker gave a talk here back in like probably 10 years ago on Gila monsters and their fine scale movement patterns? Raise your hand if you remember that. Wow, that means I'm not going to be repeating it. I don't know. Mickey might even be tuned in here. Mickey, I'm sorry, I'm stealing your data. But I made you everything you are today, so we'll call that even. So Mickey came up with this ingenious idea, that we could put rabbit fur on the belly of a Gila monster, load it up with fluorescent powder, release the Gila monster, take your UV or fluorescent light out there and see where they went. And this was really important, right? Because when you're doing radio telemetry, you track a Gila monster, you get him there, you go the next day, he's over there, it's 100 meters away. You don't know what he did in between at all. Is he moving all over the darn place? Or are they moving essentially linear, in a straight line, which is what we have to assume based on, the data that we have, correct? And they have this very characteristic waddle. And it's really cool too, because when you see them, they'll move around like this. They'll get to a road and they'll just go straight. get to the other side. He did a bunch of these Gila monsters that he caught in the middle of the night, going out and tracking them. And in order to record their tracks, you have to go wherever they went, right? And he'd just be crawling on his belly under a hackberry and through some big old choyas and stuff. And the guy was, I mean, it was torturous. But you know, you gotta put in the effort for science, right? And he got quite a few tracks. And here's a good example of one of them where the reason they're really blocky like that is because you can't, the Gila monster didn't go like up there and then take a sharp right. It's just the GPS resolution, you know, you can't get the exact beautiful, there are ways you can actually smooth that out. Mickey hasn't got around to that yet. But anyway, you could see what, if you'd have tracked that Gila monster here and tracked him the next day and he was here, you probably thought, well, he's trying to avoid the road. He's just getting over there and there he is. Well, it turns out he crossed the road twice to get there. And so now you can imagine where you could take these data and map that onto the site and you could get all kinds of really good information about use versus availability of anthropogenic and non-anthropogenic structures. That's indeed what we're doing. This is another Gila monster track where he's like avoiding the golf course, and they do kind of tend to want to go underneath trees and stuff like this, hiding. It seems like they like some canopy over it. By the way, if you go out and radio, or if you track a Gila monster and you find him, and then you're thinking, okay, I'm gonna like hide and watch him and see where he goes, they don't go for it. You can't follow them from a distance. They'll just be like, I'll walk some more to be like, it's amazing. And it's just like, what's that large mammal doing over there, man? You keep looking at, and then they just go into a burrow or something. So this was what we needed to do to figure it out. And here's another one. One thing we found, and this is this would be a really great study. Somebody might be interested in chemical sensing in these animals. I mean, Gila monsters living in a molecular world, right? They're just tongue flicking, they got their head down and they're on their way to breakfast or dinner or whatever. They're nest raiders. And what they do is they actually will go around like this. They'll go and they'll explore like a burrow here. And you'll see a bunch of that fluorescent powder all messy around the burrow. And then they'll go back to another burrow. But what they keep doing as they're foraging is they'll come back on their track sometimes. And you'll see them and they'll go right on their same track. I gotta think they might be, you know, sensing or smelling their own trail that they've laid, chemical trail that they've laid down, and maybe that's how they orient, but perhaps, right? So I guarantee you, they're living in a world we don't understand. And, you know, that fascinates me, and I'd like to know more about that. So you see the straight line versus total distance. 31 is the average straight line distance. This is per movement bout, and it's really more like, you know, 69, so more than double. And I remember I was talking to, who was it? I think it was Dan Beck. He had, I forget who it was now, but you know, there's some energy curves that have been published for some of these animals like Gila monsters. They're real low energy critters. And they look at their oxygen consumption doing different activities and stuff, and you can kind of come up with a good idea of how much energy a Gila monster would need in order to, like, you know, survive, right? Maintain his tissues at whatever level, and then, you know, how much he'd need to maybe reproduce and so on and so forth. And these are all very important factors in the life of a very, you know, low energy animal like a Gila monster. It turns out they don't have to eat a lot in order to get what they need. Probably pretty handy living in an environment that changes a lot and things can be scarce. Resources can be very scarce, right? But I think they need to redo those calculations because Gila monsters are moving a lot more than we thought they were. And so I think that probably has implications for more than just, you know, the sort of understanding their movement patterns and how we might be able to take that information and use it to help us better understand how we might manage Gila monsters and do some things for them that might actually help, you know, in some small way ensure that we still have Gila monsters around, which I think is what that's really what we're looking to do. Let me talk a little bit about all the snakes we have out there. You'll notice that the Gila monster it's not a snake, but it is number 3 on the list. And these are just ranked by how many of these we found. This is every single capture or encounter of every single snake that we've caught out there since 2002, and the total 7,348. And this includes both initial captures and recaptures. We can easily break this down by captures and recaptures. Some of these animals we recapture a lot. So the number of actual unique individual Gila monsters is actually only about little over 400, I think, isn't it? Do you know that, Anthony, off the top of your head? I think 390 something. You don't have to look it up. See how he just goes to look it up? I love that, man. But anyway, so, you know, we get a lot of recaptures, and some Gila monsters, we got like 10 or 12 or 15 or 20 recaptures. But look at that. There's a lot of snakes out there, man. I mean, some people I show this and they're like, oh my God, they're afraid, you know. Other people can't believe there's that many snakes, and you know, who knows how many we didn't see, right? But for some of these species, we're actually able to get estimates of how many are there. Problem with when you have data like this is you're just counting the number you see. There's some problems with those kind of data from a statistical point of view. You can't, and the main reason why that is because your chance of seeing the animal changes a lot. It varies a lot, right? And they call that detection probability. And if you don't have a good idea what the probability is you're going to see an animal in the first place, you could see a whole bunch of them, and you know, you wouldn't be able to calculate how many are there very well. It would throw you off. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so they do a lot of analyses around that. And I'm sure people in this room know exactly what I'm talking about, have done these kinds of analyses. And so some of these we have high enough, those depend on high recapture rates. So if you get an animal, you know, like a lyre snake, we have very few recaptures of lyre snakes. Even though we get a lot of lyre snakes out there, that's because lyre snakes love rocks, I'm sure. Yeah.
425 individual Gila monsters.
Did you hear that? 425 individual Gila monsters. That's according to Anthony. You guys aren't impressed that he just like busts out that number? I mean, when you get to be my age and you can't remember anything, you're even more impressed by that kind of. No, but yeah, 425 out of 9. But so yeah, we recapture them a lot. So what was I talking about?
Sonoran lyre snakes.
Yeah. So there's a lot of those out there because there's a lot of rocks out there. They're very tied to rocks, just like tiger rattlesnakes are, and actually just like black-tailed rattlesnakes are. Both very, very enamored of rocky environments. And so some of these we hardly ever would get a recapture from them. And the way we know when we get a recapture is because we put a microchip in the animal. I probably forgot to mention that, but all these animals get a small microchip implanted underneath their skin. And it's just like one you put in your dog or whatever. And that way, when we catch them, we can scan them and see if that's that same guy or not. So yeah, that's a good way to. So what do you do with these kind of data? I guess is kind of what I'm leading up to, you know, because it's just like relative abundance, right? And you also, if you start to look at that by year and you plot it out, then, you know, you even have to, then you can't just say how many numbers there are, because every year we spend different amounts of time looking for them. Tell me when I'm done, Robert, because like I said, I can walk
I was
off.
asking Anthony the number question.
Oh, does anybody want me to stop now? Because I'm happy to
This is
stop.
fascinating.
Okay, I mean, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but seriously, I've been talking for over an hour. Okay, I'm just gonna wrap it up. Okay, and let's wrap it up with this stuff right here. So the relative abundance, now we have to like relativize how many of these snakes we see based on how much time we spent looking for them, our effort, right? And so that's why you see this number here. This is the snakes per kilometer. And, you know, of course, we're not seeing 0.3 snakes, you know, but per kilometer, that's what it comes to. And so that's called an index of relative abundance, which is even more difficult to work with, or maybe harder to draw good inferences from. But you can see here, if you look at where did the thing go? There should be oh, here it is down here. It used to be up there. Road right here. So when the roads that we drive, they're actually around the outside of the golf course. They're not far from it, but they're around the outside. But then some of them do go in kind of in between. The golf cart's really literally right next to to the golf course, you know, the greens, the fairways and everything. But I wouldn't have expected there'd be differences, but we get this really consistent difference where the relative abundance of these animals seem to be declining on the road, but they don't seem to be declining as much on the golf course, if at all. So that's kind of weird. And you know, the first guess would be, well, they're getting whacked on the road, dummy, you know, they're getting run over. But we don't see very many run over. So maybe they're getting scavenged really quickly. We need to maybe look more into that, figure out, do some sort of modeling to find out how many animals would have to get killed on the road before you might expect a decline. There's lots of different ways that we need to try to continue to look into this in maybe a bit more of a creative kind of forensic sort of way, you know. But if you look at the golf cart, you can see there's just, I mean, they're not going up, they're not going down. So these animals are persisting in this development, which has grown a lot. But again, there's all this, you know, pretty good space out there too. I don't think I wanted to say anything else about that. Oh, and then the weird thing is, and this is what I'm hoping that when I was mentioning starting some analyses looking at the species diversity data. I don't know much about that. I'm not very good at that. And I'm hoping, you know, with Pauline here and everything and some other people getting involved, we might be able to figure some of this out, at least, you know, at least give it a shot. Like, what's happening with all these different species? Like, look at this is, you know, gopher snakes, right? Pica, Pitullophus, Catenifer. And I would think they might like a development like this, you know, they seem like they're kind of everywhere. They seem like they're really a generalist species. Would you guys agree with that? But look at they've been going down all these years. Well, maybe somebody else is going up and that's causing them a problem, right? So there's a lot of different mechanisms. The underlying mechanisms for why they might be going on are really hard to elucidate. Otherwise, you're just kind of waving your arms at it. If it's interspecific competition between them and some other snake, show me how you're going to show that, you know? So there's a lot of really big challenges with that. But here's like king snakes, they're going up. And, you know, you can take a look at all these different snakes and some of them are going up, some of them are going down. And so I think what we need to do is look at kind of a more multivariate analysis where we might be able to just take the species of the snake, use that as a covariate in the analysis, and we might learn, we can throw some other data in there. It's not just how many houses there are, it's also what the weather was like. It's also how much precipitation there was the previous year. There's a lot of different and potential environmental variables that we can put into this model. And we can actually try to pull out what's leading to the most variation of what we're seeing. And finally, here's something I wanted to show you. This is some work by Diego Huerta, who worked in my lab as an undergrad. Very smart guy, but he did a lot of analyses. And we're basically looking at the 3 rattlesnake species. And what's happening is Atrox has taken over. And that really does not surprise me at all. In fact, I don't have it recorded anywhere. And I don't think it's because I'm a genius, but I predicted that Atrox would eventually become, you know, would take over. Actually, I predicted they'd be the most common snake out there. But for many, many years, actually every year until last year, Cronus tigris was the most abundant or relatively abundant snake at that site, which is kind of shocking. You know, I love tigers and I'm good at finding where they live, I guess, because that place is tiger rattlesnake heaven. But guess what? Last year, Atrox blew them out of the water. And so things are happening. Maybe, do they really have an advantage? You know, if you look at things, some of the data we have, like looking at the number of captures and things like that, that this is the number of neonates, you know, that diamondbacks have more babies. And for some reason, black-tailed rattlesnakes, chromos, they have super small litter size. They have these huge, big babies, but they only have like 3 or 4 babies. So they got a completely different reproductive strategy. Diamondbacks have many more babies. And here you can see kind of like when we palpate the data that we get from that, Diamondbacks are just more fecund, as you might say, right? They just have more babies. So maybe they're winning the game, just, you know, having more kids. And some other possible advantages, maybe the Diamondbacks are able to eat all these big things. If you go drive along the golf cart, you'll see all these rabbits everywhere, you know, and there's a billion quail out there and bunnies. Bunny's a rabbit, isn't it? the same thing, it saves people. Anyway, diamondbacks are probably eating those guys, but tiger rattlesnakes are not eating rabbits. They got puny little heads. Molosses have a huge, Molosses is weird. They have the largest head relative to their body size of any rattlesnake. Tiger rattlesnakes have the smallest head relative to their body size of any rattlesnake, and they're both extremely rock-dwelling saxicolous species. So I'm not sure Dr. Lowe was right when he surmised that the tiger rattlesnakes have puny heads, so they can, you know, get inside all the cracks and crevices and pull out the prey. But maybe they're eating something completely different. So you know, one of the things that we looked at was diet, and that when we take the fecal samples from the snake, you clean them up and you sort through them, you see what's in there. And unless you do a lot of really hard work, like I have Grayson and Joss are doing, two guys who work in my lab, they're actually figuring out more detail of what the snakes are eating. But it's really easy to see the hair, and so you know it ate a mammal. And then it's really easy to see the scales, so you know they ate a lizard. Or they could have ate another snake, but probably not very often, right? So unless they're a king snake, we'd have to look more closely. But anyway, just looking at these three species, then we see that there's really, you know, you might think they're just eating something really different here, and that might explain the difference that we're seeing, but not. You know, they're all big mammal eaters. Anthony did some analyses trying to figure this out, what might be related to it, and it seems like, you know, with the previous winter's rain can really drive these rodent populations to explode. And rodent populations are like that. They're known to kind of cycle like that. And it may just be that when we see they're eating all these rodents and they're not eating these lizards, might have nothing to do with how many rodents and lizards are there. Might have something to do with the, you know, there's just so many rodents. There may be a better energy rich, you know, put them in a bomb calorimeter, you probably blow them up. They probably got more energy in it than a lizard. I don't know. Hank's probably done that. I bet he's probably blown up a small amount of it. But anyway, yeah. So we don't really know for sure what's going on there, but it looks like there's nothing obvious going on there. Now we need to dig down deeper and see exactly what it is they're eating. And so Grayson and Joss, for example, they're looking at they have a reference collection that shows what the scales look like on all these different lizard species. They can look at the scales in the snake turd and kind of figure out what he ate and stuff like that. You know, atrox are clearly their habitat generalists. These other two species are up in the rocks. You know, how that plays in, I'm not sure, but you could imagine it would. And then I'm going to stop there. We've done a lot of outreach. I've been trying to get Tiger to support me because I studied tiger rattlesnake. Now that he's not that good anymore, you know, who cares, right? There are some rules of golf associated with rattlesnakes. If you get if you have a dangerous snake, you get a free drop, right? Anybody play golf? You get the free drop, right? You ever notice how when you ask a room full of like environmentalists if any of them play golf, none of them do? Yeah, so if you're out playing golf and you get this happen, you get a free drop. But I don't know how you're going to get your ball to get the free drop. I think I would probably swap it out with another ball. There's a lot of golf balls at Stone Canyon. People do not go look for their lost golf balls. They've seen presentations like this. They don't go look for their golf balls. That's it. I'm sorry it was so long. Oh, man. Time for Yes, sir.
So it seems like a lot of these resident people are pretty tolerant of wildlife. I can't recall the author on this paper, I read it a few months back, and it was dealing with relocation of problem rattlesnakes. Short distance, long distance, pros and cons. Long distance movement, you know, it's not good for the snake. It reduces its fitness because it spends a lot of energy trying to relocate, trying to find its own range. Short distance relocation is expensive to the management. dig this back into that problem area, so you relocate. So what's your thought on that? And as I remember, 600 meters was a long distance relocation. Doesn't seem like 600 meters is very far, for the tire beds.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's better people to ask, some of the pioneering work that was done on looking at translocations, because it's becoming a bigger and bigger issue. It's all over the place. And some of the best work that's been done on that is by a woman from Arizona named Erica Novak. That might have been the paper you were reading. And she's done some really good work looking at Western Diamondbacks and how moving them too far away. And I feel like, and somebody like Erica, who's more up on the literature than I am, she might not totally agree with me, but I think there was a paper by Howard Reinert and Rupert that they put out, and it was with timber rattlesnakes, and they translocated all these timber rattlesnakes, and like half of them died. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it wasn't good. And it looked like, translocating these snakes is not a good mitigation strategy. And so I think that got in everybody's mind. And everybody sort of like decided, we could only translocate snakes a small distance. And then they started doing more research on that, kind of challenging to do, but it seems like it might hold up for some species. But I think what we're finding now is that it's highly variable. It's very, very idiosyncratic to the species. It can be idiosyncratic to the environment that they're in, where you translocate them to. It's probably very dependent on age class and when they're dispersing. If they're dispersing at young age class, maybe you'd have a successful translocation if you move the small animals, the young guys, because they're going to disperse anyway. And so there's all these factors. We did a lot of translocations of horned lizards, flat-tailed horned lizards, and it was kind of a mixed bag. They kind of did okay though in the end. Again, like it's always the same answer. It depends, right? Some of the animals, obviously males and females would probably react differently, and gravid versus non-gravid. So I don't think there's one answer to that. I do know that what we try to do in Tucson, or what the fire departments try to do, and a lot of people have advised them on this, work with them over the years, is don't take them so far away, because they used to get like 100 of them in a barrel and then take them up to Gates or take them up to Reddington Road or something. And, it might even be a species that wouldn't even occur up there or something, And I feel like they've learned a lot about that, but I feel like there's still a lot of unanswered questions. And I think people get pretty emotional about how they feel, what they think is going on there, But I'd say don't move them very far if you can, because the idea is they're going to be in their home range and they'll still know where they're at. But if you're in a hotel or something, and you move them a little ways away, you might want to move them farther. I've even gone so far as to say maybe, if they show these terrible aberrant movement patterns after you translocate them long distances, and then they become an actual bigger nuisance than they were in the first place, maybe that doesn't make sense, right? So then you move them not very far, and then somebody gets bitten, and rattlesnakes are dangerous, right? And so I don't know, it's a tough one. I feel like it's a pretty intractable problem.
Erica is saying, yes, that's about right, Matt. Long distance translocation out of the home range has a higher mortality rate across species and age groups.
Erica would know. She's one of the experts on that. She pioneered that work with. I think she did a lot of that at national parks, Goode, some of those places where they get these snakes hanging around the visitor center. Any other? Yes, sir.
I'm kind of new to herpetology, so I'm just a little curious. You said that Gila monsters are den raiders, meaning like they eat eggs, right?
Yeah, nest raiders is what I would basically characterize them as. Yeah,
Do you see like an instance of or surrounding golf courses, them trying to digest golf balls, since they do kind of resemble?
I haven't seen that. We've had quite a few Gila monsters that we captured, and they took a big old shat. Haven't seen any golf balls in there yet. Excuse my French. But yeah, I mean, no, I haven't seen any golf balls, but we do see egg shells in there.
I figured they wouldn't actually be able to digest them, but
I think if the Gila monster came across a golf ball and you happen to rub that golf ball in some small rodents or something like that, I bet he'd wolf it right down. Wouldn't surprise me one, and I bet he'd really regret it. Any other?
Easy question. Yeah, he says, Matt, you showed significant differences between sites and several parameters. I'm wondering if this is between site differences affected by the fact that these are rock associated snakes, i.e. are the sites more different in tigris than they are in atrox? I don't know what he's asking.
Well, I didn't do any comparisons between tigris and atrox at those other sites. I only did that at Stone Canyon. I mean, it's a good question from that point of view, and that's probably how you would ultimately figure it out. And that's why having one site that's this unique urban development is challenging to make, to go out too far, right, on your interpretations and stuff. So I'm not quite sure what Bob's asking there. I do think that it seems like he's kind of driving at habitat differences potentially.
Yeah.
And I would say that, I think I did mention that atrox, I think we all think of them as a very generalist species of rattlesnake. And I think we all know they can eat all kinds of stuff. They eat doves. Yeah. Dove eaters. They hang out by ponds and stuff. And, yeah, so I'm not quite sure exactly what he's saying there, but I have a feeling the way that these two species use the environment much differently than each other. And I'm guessing that's going to be at least part of the answer for why we're seeing the atrox start to dominate over the tigris. And I think I have a lot of good ideas of why I think that is, and I bet you they're going to end up being true, but I got to figure out how to prove it.
I've got another question here. Beyond NPP, how important is relative humidity is the time that tigers can be out and about and increase their odds of eating and mating? Is relative humidity higher on or near the golf course?
Yeah. What is NPP?
No.
Something precipitation or something? Well, I think relative humidity is huge.
Net primary production.
Oh, okay. I think relative humidity is huge. I think these animals are, I think osmoregulation is a huge thing that these animals are dealing with. And if they're in a humid environment, then they're going to probably be more active, and you see that. We see this real like lull in activity during April and May, right? But that could also be confounded with when is the mating season, for example. I would say that, I don't think people have studied that very much, which is kind of shocking, right? Because it's like we all think that's true. And I did have this one undergrad guy named John Bosak who actually was trying to figure out if moonlight might be affecting activity patterns. And he went back and found all the moon data is out there. And I mean, he worked really hard on that. He did a great job of like trying to figure all, not only is the moon, it comes up, some nights it doesn't come up and at the angle, and he figured all this stuff out, put it all together in this big old model. And basically the upshot of it all is the moon. Does the moon matter? And the answer is it depends. So, and it depends in this way, more or less, according to John, and I'd have to agree with him based on his data, is that if you get really good conditions for snake activity, i.e., right, the nice perfect temperatures and there's a lot of humidity, the moon doesn't matter. They come out. If it's crappy out and it's super dry and it's super hot, they don't come out. The moon matters. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah. So I think that's basically, so I think humidity, and we could so easily test this. We have the data. We get relative humidity on we have so much data on relative humidity and temperature. And so we need to start, thinking more about how we can incorporate that into some of our models as well, right? Because I have a feeling anytime you look at any behaviors of snakes or habitat, whatever you want to call it, and you are seeing that you're not getting the full picture, if you could effectively incorporate temperature data and relative humidity data, I'll bet you would explain a massive amount of the unexplained variation that you're finding in these data sets. That'd be my guess. Yeah.
With the tiger rattlesnakes, you said that you had some females that were breeding annually. How long do you think they could sustain that? Or like, what's the longest you've seen them breed annually?
I think the answer is, guess what the answer is? It depends. Right? I mean, I don't know, Coral, and we're not even sure exactly what's going on there. We do know that we've had a couple females that gave birth. Two females that I can think of off the top of my head, and maybe some of the people who've worked with me, who can actually remember stuff better than I can, which isn't hard. Might remember this too, but there was a couple females that gave birth, and then a couple months later, before they went down, they died. We found them dead. There was no obvious reason, so this is pure, obviously we're speculating here, but they didn't have good body condition. They did not look good. It really takes it out of them to have babies. What they're basically doing is they're getting good body condition, and that typically for them means having a lot of fat, because they don't eat when they're gravid, and they have to go through this long period. They have a bunch of babies, and I think it's very possible that it puts them over the hump. And I'm guessing the other factors they probably interact in all kinds of ways we don't understand, like maybe drought or weather conditions, all these different things that could put these rattlesnakes at risk, are probably just enhanced for these gravid females because they're already living on that fine edge, right? And that's all out there. That's all predicted theoretically and everything, but showing it can be really, really challenging. Yeah, but there would be ways to do that. You could manipulate.
How long you had like observed that they did it? So about 3 years.
It varies. It really does. I mean, some snakes that reproduce annually didn't do it in the same year that some other snake did. I think they get on their own trajectory, and I think when they're lifetime reproducers as well, I think they forego litters. We know that. We know they do. When you catch them in the fall and you palpate them, they have very small hard follicles that are in their ovaries, and they haven't really gotten haven't yolked up yet or developed, but you can detect them. And then you catch that same snake when it comes out the next spring, and then you can feel them and they're still there usually, but then sometimes very shortly thereafter, you don't feel them anymore. And I don't know what that mechanism is, but they are able to resorb or somehow get rid of those follicles. And it's not by, giving birth to them, because they haven't even ovulated yet, right? Snakes have a little bit different way their reproductive mode is a little different than mammals. But anyway, yeah, so don't know. Yeah.
When you were mentioning ecological traps, do you think after 20 years, if Tucson was to like cut down on the golf courses and stuff, do you think the snakes would kind of be a death sentence since they're used to that ecosystem?
If Tucson cuts down on golf courses?
Yeah, if they started like making higher regulations on the water use, you wouldn't be getting double daily rains, I guess. Like,
Yeah,
you think
I
that
mean,
would-
it could be, that would be another sort of kind of way that it could be kind of like a trap, I guess, couldn't it? They become dependent on those resources, and then golf becomes less popular, or water becomes less. Isn't water already like super scarce? I think it is. We just don't act like it. But
Yeah.
so yeah, I don't really know how to answer that question, other than if these snakes have become dependent on this environment that has subsidized water, and then you pull that away, then yeah, you might be setting them up for a fall. Yeah. I don't know how dependent they become on it, if it has any bearing on their ability to move after they don't